Welcome back to Inside Personal Growth. This is Greg Boyson, the host of Inside Personal Growth. Hey, and Seth, all my listeners know me. They just don't know you. Joining me is Seth Goldenberg, and Seth has a brand new book out, literally like 2 days ago, called Radical Curiosity, Questioning Commonly Held Beliefs to Imagine Flourishing Futures. I will, right off the bat, tell people, get this book. We're going to have a link to Amazon. This is really well written, well designed, well thought out. And Seth is the guy you're going to want to listen to today. And Seth, I'm going to take a minute to tell my listeners a tad bit about you, because they know all they need to know about me, but they don't know what they need to know about you yet. And then when they're done with this interview, they're going to race out and get a copy of your book. So Seth is the founder and CEO of Curiosity & Company, a purpose-driven design, business, and innovation studio propelling cultural change, formerly known as Epic Decade. Curiosity & Company has tackled a series of high-profile projects to solve some of the most ambitious economic, public health, and environmental challenges with Fortune 500 clients such as Apple, American Express, and PepsiCo. Leading nonprofit organizations and regional governments, Curiosity & Company also hosts idea salons, custom designed exclusive retreat and conference attended by Nobel Prize winners, senators, and executives from companies. Well, that's enough about you. The reality is he's a thinker, he's a thought leader, and he's a doer. And I appreciate that about authors who are out there doing it, and he is. And one way to do it is to write a book so that everybody can pay attention to the message. And I think that's really important. Seth, if you would, tell the listeners about how you came to write Radical Curiosity. Everybody's heard of curiosity. They just haven't heard the word radical in front of it, probably. And why do you believe that curiosity is on the verge of extinction with, what you quote, devastating consequences? And what I love about this, folks, just for those listening, Seth is going to get you to think. If there's one thing that's happened is I think people have gone on to automatic pilot about thinking, right? And their critical thinking skills. So if there's any one person that could reinfuse the critical thinking skills, it's going to be Seth. So how'd you write this? Why'd you write it? And why do you believe we're on the verge of extinction with devastating consequences?
Well, what an introduction. I love your energy, Greg. It's so wonderful to be able to visit with you. So thank you for that. I love that we're diving right into the juiciest one first as well.
Might as well get going.
Let's do it.
Your family and your kids and your dog's going to show up. So let's make sure we get there.
You're so true. Well, I think to answer your first question, I have had a design studio for just over a decade, and I've been a practitioner of design thinking and all kinds of strategic cultural change kind of work for almost 25 years now. And for me, Radical Curiosity was my opportunity to codify a new blended practice that we realize every day in our studio. So Radical Curiosity isn't just an idea, it's actually what we're calling the operating system of my creativity studio. And that term, to your point, that special word radical, it really comes from the Latin root of radicalis, right? Which really means getting to the roots of things. And I think what we've really come to realize, my team and I have biologists and educators and anthropologists, a very interdisciplinary kind of ensemble. What we've come to realize is that what we really help leaders and organizations and individuals work on is, what are the deep assumptions that are causing the models for how we live, learn, work, play, and sustain ourselves? And are those legacy models real? Can we upend them? Can we redesign them? If we want a world that is more flourishing, we probably have to ask questions, that curiosity part, but not just passive questions, questions that really get to the roots of things. And that's really what the book is all about.
Well, what I like about the book is it's somebody always told me, you want to write a good book, whisper in their ear the message they want to hear. In other words, they're like a good friend. I felt like this book was a good friend. It was
Mm,
actually speaking to something that I resonate with, so I wanted to read more and understand more. Plus, the way it's laid out and designed is superior. So you open the book with a story about Steve Jobs and his friend Johnny Ive. Hope I got that right. In an op-ed New York Wall Street Journal article as being the most curious person he'd ever known. Seth, how is it that you define the radical curiosity, and what is it about Steve Jobs that made him so radically curious? I agree with his buddy, but I also know there's other thinkers out there that have been radically curious beyond Steve Jobs as well. And you might want to mention a few of those
mm,
in the answer to this as well. But
absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah. No, I love that. Yeah. I mean, one of the pleasures of my life was working intimately with some of the executives at Apple. It was actually one of our first clients when I formed my company. And as a designer, Apple is like the demigod. Apple is, Mount Olympus, right?
yeah,
Johnny Ive has really shaped the design field. Johnny was and will always have a legacy as the chief design officer who really forged a very special kind of friendship with Steve. And the two of them really built much of Apple. And of course, major figures like Tim have been extraordinarily influential along the way. But I think the creativity that Johnny Ive and Steve Jobs shared, why I opened there is, we put Steve on a kind of pedestal, so many of us, right?
mm-hmm.
He's such an iconic figure. And I think there's still probably not a great nuanced understanding of what made him so special. I mean, even with the Walter Isaacson book on him and et cetera, right? And I
Exposing
think,
things that you maybe didn't want to hear about him, but
yeah, right, exactly. I mean,
right,
he's human. He's complex and godly, but he's human, right?
exactly.
Just
We're all
like all,
human, all of
right.
us.
But I think that why I opened with that, I love. See, Johnny is also a very private person, and I thought it was very beautiful, and I think uh, he reveals an intimacy about naming curiosity as his view of what made Steve so special. And so even though there's biographers and there's journalists and there's people who are 1, 2 to 7 Kevin Bacon steps away from Steve, to have Johnny, such an intimate friendship, say what made him special was his curiosity. And he describes it in that passage as a ferocious inquiry into life.
Yes.
And that for me, I think to your point, that's not just a Steve thing. Many leaders have that. We all may have that inside of us. And so I just thought it was a wonderful way to say, sure, Apple's a trillion-dollar company. We all hold their products in our pockets. But, isn't it amazing that the most intimate friend named wasn't his business savvy? It wasn't the trillion-dollar impact that we all kind of feel overwhelmingly brand idolatry for, but it was his curiosity that made him a great leader.
Yeah, and reflecting as you're speaking about Steve Jobs, I also reflect that what came up for me was Walt Disney.
Mm.
And as a young lad, I think I was 6 or 7, I actually got to
Mhm.
meet him. I
Oh,
shook
wow.
his hand.
Oh,
And
that's great.
the curiosity the man had, and the fervor for life, and
Mhm.
to experiment, and to not be afraid of risk, and to go do the things that need to be done. When you talk about curiosity, it's like it's there, tons of curiosity. um
Absolutely.
you've hosted 3,000 idea salons across the country over the last 10 years, and you engage your clients to leverage questions and rewrite legacy, as you say, narratives that no longer serve them. And I'm almost kind of look at them as our bias too, right? It's like we
Mhm.
have been ingrained with these bias. I always remember Margaret Wheatley used to speak about the ecosystems that we would live in and the effects that we've had on them. What have you learned about reinvigorating the power of human inquiry into life and being able to kind of sustain it? Because, a salon is a salon. You're there for a day or 2 days or 3 days, whatever the retreat is, you leave. And then I'm
Mhm.
like, well, how do I sustain this energy
Yeah.
and then insert it into my company, into my people, into my world, into my design, into anything? And the reality is, it's like, how do I imbibe this? I take, like, let's drink it. Let's just, like, give me that. And I think that is the $1 million question, isn't it?
Right. Right. Yeah, absolutely. I love your gesture. It's so wonderful. No, I look, and I'm not sure there's a silver bullet. I loved your description of the book in terms of a whispering into the ear, right? The kind of seduction of it all. I mean, I think living a life of inquiry, embracing curiosity as a lifestyle. I
Mhm.
mean, that is the ultimate lifelong project. It's not a day or two or three at the retreat, but it's also not a single project
Right.
where it doesn't show up in one part of your life and not another. I mean, I think it's really a mental model of how we show up to ourselves, how we show up for our people, how we want to contribute to the world. I think for me, look, I began as an artist. I was an oil painter quite young, exhibiting in art galleries, and I evolved into design. I am now an entrepreneur. I like to build businesses. It's almost like I see those as new canvases, new works of art. But I think being curious is about that same kind of Steve Jobs kind of I'm insatiable, right? I'm
Yeah.
constantly hungry. And I loved your mention of Walt Disney. There's a great quote. He says, "We're curious, we keep opening new doors."
Into
Right?
imagination.
Absolutely. And I
I don't want to interrupt you, but I want
no,
to
not at
say,
all.
I do this podcast show almost 16 years, and I
Mm,
always wonder the impetus. And I had a little Jewish mother that was the most curious person in the whole world. You could sit down with her, anybody she didn't know, and 20 minutes later, she knew everything about you. Right.
that's great. That's a
So,
great
so
example.
I keep thinking to myself that maybe my culture has inspired, this whole, you talk about ingraining this in your DNA. I
Right.
was kind of ingrained with it. I had a mother that no matter who I brought over, she had 27,000 questions before they left. Even I was with, I
I
did
had
a,
that same mother.
I did, honest to God. I went to the other day, and I'm not dropping names here, but Grant Benning was the guy that first hired me. His daughter is Annette Benning. He's
Mm,
96. I
mm.
went to his house the other day and brought him lunch because he's not real ambulatory. So I brought him lunch, and he sat there and he says, "I remember your mother."
Oh,
And I
wow.
was like, "What?" He said, "Do you remember that your mother had to interview me first before you took the job?" And I was like, "Yeah, she had all kinds of questions, didn't she?"
That
Who
is
were
so
you?
great.
What's this? And seriously, he says, "Your mother was the only mother that I ever got interviewed by before anyone was hired."
Well, I love that as an example, right? I mean, whether it's the kind of artist sensibility or there's something imprinted in the Jewish cultural mindset,
Yeah.
I think there's lots of reasons that questions and curiosity guide different kind of traditions, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you speak that we're in this cultural, in, how do you say it? Interregnum,
Uh,
intergram.
yeah, it's this concept that we're living in a interregnum, a cultural.
Interregnum. I wanted to make sure I got the right word right, which
Yeah.
is in transition between fundamentally different sets of value, catalyzing an evolution in shared framework of the human experience That's a mouthful, but it's really pretty simple. And I'm going to say this, that we will question the legacy narratives that in turn the norms, beliefs, and mindsets that we inherited from preceding generations. Speak with us, if you would, about these 5 pillars of radical curiosity and the shifts that we can make in our consciousness and worldview. Because at the heart of this, at the true heart, is really questioning the current worldviews and our beliefs and our perspectives, which is why the book is so intriguing to me and will be to everybody who buys it, because you can actually start questioning your questions.
Indeed, indeed.
Okay?
Well, maybe it'd be helpful, maybe just to even frame up what is this interregnum idea first, because that might be most useful. I mean, to your point, it does sound like a mouthful, but actually think of society as like your own personal laptop, and we install a new OS system. We're putting on Yosemite. We're installing Yosemite or whatever the new OS system is.
Catalina, Yosemite, doesn't matter. Yeah,
whatever it is. Yeah, right. Exactly. Your computer shuts down and it rewires the code. The code are guiding principles for how the computer operates.
Correct.
I believe that our nation, our society, our world is kind of going through an OS upgrade.
I agree.
Right? And the interregnum is an idea that tries to describe that. So traditionally, an interregnum is almost like a baton pass between governments, right? One party to another party, one leader to another leader. It's the space between 2 elections, let's say. That's a traditional interregnum. But I've kind of I've proposed this new term. What if not government, but what if culture is going through that baton pass, right? And the reason I bring this up, and I think it relates to your question, is, look, so many basic human experiences are getting rewritten right now. There are now more than 57 genders you can identify with on social media. I'm sure the individual that first hired you at 90 plus years old may not have conceived of the very idea that we would, in mainstream popular culture, embrace 57 identities of gender. So many ideas that we thought were unquestionable, like this is how the world is, this is how bank works. Nope, too big to fail. The bank went away. Thank you, economic crisis. So many things that were stable ideas are getting upended and reimagined and becoming more open. And it's a very exciting time to be alive, I think, because of that.
Would you say, or would you agree with this comment, that political structures, governmental structures, educational structures, our own identities, that it's somewhat messy? It's one thing to go to Apple and ask them to download Catalina 15.2.3 and make sure my system works. But as human beings, I think we've all gotten this a bit messy.
Absolutely. I love that you said it like that, because I mean, in some ways that passes the baton, and I appreciate your very kind comments about the book, because we have a series of diagrams that actually, that in-between space, I actually kind of call the messy middle, to your point, that in-between zone where it feels like a lot of friction, almost like growing pains between one model and the next model. I think when you think about it this way, when you read the newspaper, you look at world events, it's helpful to conceive that, this moment happening, this protest, this governmental shift, this policy, these are indicators, they're little moments of evidence of that messy space, that friction you're talking about, right?
So yeah, imagine, and it's, when you look at it, I mean, let's face it, we, in a history of our lives, I'm 68 years old. So when your perspective about how the internet has sped up information and how we receive information, how we digest information, how we go through this, actually allows us to, and I'm going to say it's been the evolutionary helper in this. I wouldn't say it's the only helper, but it certainly has been a big evolutionary helper
Right.
in having us question, and even all the way from democratization standpoint, all the way down to everybody in the world, because we all can carry, as you said a minute ago, this device and
Yeah.
receive information to actually start to assimilate, question, and think about things, including interpreting different languages across the device, right? Anything
Well,
you want to add to that, or am I
no,
just like
I
off
love
base?
I love where you're taking us, because it aligns with an argument that I propose in the book that, I mean, as we both do this gesture, right? A Hollywood film studio and all of wisdom of all libraries on the planet now fit in our pocket. And so what that means is that knowledge has become a commodity. And so if knowledge is a commodity, then curiosity is not so much about the recall and regurgitation maybe of traditional education, where we're memorizing information, demonstrating it in colloquial school, but actually curiosity is really about the discovery and the continual innovation of new knowledge, right? So the danger is if we just rest on pre-existing knowledge and we're just administering the solution sets that already exist, we begin to rest on our laurels and we no longer create new wisdom in the world.
Yeah, and you ask a big question in the book, and I look, my wife was a school teacher for 24 years, so I get it. And this is around education. This is around education. But learning. So you propose a big idea in the book, and you state that the compulsory education, or I should say education system, is a policy that requires school attendance by law. But what is education for, and should it be compulsory, you ask? I mean, this is a salon question, right? Hopefully you had a bunch of educators in the salon when you did this. That education is too big to fail, but maybe it should. That probably wouldn't go over too well with a lot of the bureaucrats in the education sector, but they really need to think about it. And that brought up this little quandary that people have been having now about Biden saying he's going to actually release everybody from their debt from education. And I'm like, well, hell, I paid my student loans. Why shouldn't everybody else, right? So politically, speak with us about the differences between education and learning and the movement of unlearning and unschooling, because this is a big one.
No, I love the convergence of your inquiry, because you're pulling on some of my favorite and most dangerous ideas. I mean, I think the challenge and the provocation there is to say we have institutionalized things. We have maybe made the management and the techniques and the tactics more important than the origin of why we're doing things in the first place. And this is a problem across every sector, not just education. Sometimes I think we get so far downstream and we're moving the pieces, but we forget why we're even in the adventure to begin with. And so it's that great quote from I think it was might have been Albert Einstein, who said, the only thing that gets in the way of my learning is education. Right. And so I think for me, I love learning. I'm a lifelong learner. I would be in school forever if I could. I think the question is,
well, you are.
Yeah, well,
you're in the school of life right now, dude, and you're learning, and you're a teacher. You're teaching.
Well said. Well said. Well, my wife is an educator. I fell in love with her and this beautiful school that she helped originate, which is all about community and civic engagement. So I'm with you. I just think even with that example, school does not have to be the four-walled classroom.
Right.
Learning does not need to have curricular standards and bureaucratic committees reviewing, the intake of what you remember. I think that what we need to do in every one of these social systems, health, housing, justice, learning, we need to remind ourselves, what do we even mean by these pursuits when we started them? We kind of push the why aside. So the compulsory point is we set up these kind of paradoxes. Does everyone believe K-12 public education is working and is the best it's ever imagined itself? No, everybody's got their story. They say, well, I would do this different, do that different. It's not great. If anything, it's really complex. I'll get to your unlearning question in a minute. But then we say, but by the way, if you don't go, we're going to throw you in jail, called truancy, right? I mean, we've set up these paradoxes for ourselves. And so rather than ask hard questions, be radically curious and say, what do we really mean? What is the purpose of learning in our society? Is it for enlightenment? Is it for citizenship? Is it for skills? Is it beginning me on a labor journey so I could be a worker? I mean, under what ideology, under what belief system did we even give birth to the system? And we forgot to have that chat.
But we haven't had that chat because the system, I'm sitting here looking at 2 degrees, a master's that's on my wall over here, and a bachelor's degree, and my high school diploma isn't up. But each time it's a piece of paper that says you've accomplished something, because the system created these diplomas to say, you can get a better job if you have that diploma, or you can do whatever. I personally haven't found that the diplomas were what created my future.
Right.
What created my future for me was me, my ability to learn on my own, and my insatiable desire to continue learning, thus the podcast show, right? So, I love it. Talk about unlearning. Because we got to unlearn those diplomas to actually check the box in your salon that says we're going to reform the educational system.
Well, I think it has a lot to do with these ideas of the legacy narratives, right? All around us, there are messages and frameworks and models that we were born into, right?
Yeah.
Money exists. US is a capitalistic society. These are the religions. This is the town. This is your family. I mean, we are born into a variety of constraints that were decided by people before we got here.
As absolutely.
Right? And for me, I think unlearning is about, and I love that you opened by talking about critical thinking, right? I thought that was quite beautiful to bring the discussion right there. I think we don't do enough thinking about thinking. Right? A kind of a level of self-awareness and collective awareness of, well, where did these ideas come from? They just came from mere mortals who were here a little earlier than us. I saw this great quote once that said, history is peer pressure from dead people. Right? It's like, but there's also these beautiful, I think it was Benjamin Franklin who talked about, we are all a part of the next revolution, right? Every generation needs a revolution to upgrade the rule and the model of society that works in context to now. So I think unlearning is about deprogramming the legacies and inheritance that maybe doesn't work in context anymore. I mean, when we said earlier, how might we see those upending indicators? And that you talked about it, that messy part, the kind of those birthing pains of a society through an OS upgrade. Imagine unlearning racism in this country. Is Black Lives Matter and the protests and the events over the past 2 to 3 years, are they an isolated event or part of a narrative arc that's a part of that operating system reboot? right?
Well,
Imagine
look, that's
on
been
learning.
going on. That's been going on since the dawn of time. But it's in our era. You're in my era since we've been brought up, the '60s. You know,
Absolutely.
so
Absolutely.
the thing that I would say though is based on kind of the learning unlearning dialogue we've been having
Hmm.
is, and in this society in particular, Western industrialized society, seems to be very, I get the term I'm going to use. You're probably not going to like it, but I think we've created more lemmings than we've ever created in our life. As a result of the structural, the norms, the beliefs that we run with in our own mind, and the very little questioning about whether or not that's where I want to be. Now, we did have a great rising here with COVID, right?
Mhm.
We had everybody's saying the great resignation. I'm resigning from the job. I can't find people to work in these jobs. I can't, whatever it might be.
Hmm.
From a good standpoint, they're questioning something very deep, and I think in a lot of people's cases, very spiritual. It is a question about my life and how I'm going to live it. I mean, a very simple question that maybe you never even asked prior to COVID because so many people die. So it's your finitude. Well, if my biggest fear is death, and that's what awoke me to questioning,
Right.
and usually in spiritual cases, it does, somebody has a near-death experience, because I do a lot of shows on spirituality, that's
Hmm.
it. But needless to say, that was just my comment. I
Yeah.
think this, you speak in your book.
Do you mind if I reply to it?
No, go ahead. I'd love to have a
Well,
dialogue about
yeah.
this.
No, just because I think it's so important what you're saying. So I didn't want us to move too fast from it, because I think you're really getting to something critical. I mean, my version of your lemmings comment is the opening chapter to build a case for radical curiosity. The kind of sound the alarm is, I believe that curiosity is an endangered species.
Yeah.
I believe that we are not asking enough questions, and we are too easily comforted by the autopilot of how the world has been set for us. And that's a dangerous place to be. And I think it leads to some very real damage that we're seeing in the world, whether it be climate, whether it be a Capitol riot attack. I mean, these are not accidental. These are expressions of the absence of inquiry, the absence of questioning and curiosity. I think what you're also adding there, on your second part, which I think is, I mean, you're like speaking my language, brother, right? I just think, it's an extraordinary time. And it's like, I want to scream from the top of the hills. What are we doing? We have so much potential, so much beauty, so much wonder, and we're squandering it, right? And
well,
so it's
radical curiosity, though, in my estimation, and I hopefully you can connect the dots here if you would, but when people get comfortable and they're not uncomfortable, okay, when they just get so comfortable, and you live in such an affluent society where you've got everything, you have the time to ponder and ask those questions. The thought would be, are you? Or are you squandering your time doing things that are not advancing your learning? Okay. And I think there's many places in this world where there's a lot of discomfort right now. Okay. We can look at Ukraine. We can look at Russia. We can look at all these other places, Sudan.
Sure.
Lots of discomfort. And we live in a society in particular, I'm talking you and me and probably 3/4 of the population of the United States, relatively comfortable, which is what the uprising outside has been saying for a long time. You guys are too damn comfortable, right? So At any rate, without me going too
Well,
far, and I don't want to go on miss on that because I got another great question for you. But
yeah,
go ahead.
okay,
Go ahead. You want to comment on
well,
it?
you're raising it. So one of the ideas. So the book at the conclusion of the book, I try and take these whispering, generous stories that is a good book as you described through these kind of vignettes. I distill those vignettes into what I call 28 building blocks for radical curiosity. One of those is something I think you're hitting on, which is what I call question inequity. So we know about economic inequity and the kind of disparaging rate of value and the kind of human rights and conditions that are coming from that globally and in particular here in the United States. But I think one of the ways I'm trying to flip that is say, well, questioning and curiosity may have become a kind of luxury good, to your point, right? Who has the power to be asking the questions? Who sets the agenda? Do I even, if I'm trying to just survive in an economic condition, just to make it through the day, do I even have the luxury of having the imagination to set curiosity as a kind of guiding North Star in my life or in my work? That itself is rare air. So I think you're talking about
totally
an inequity that goes far beyond economics, but the rights and the responsibility for the capacity to question.
Well, what I like about what you're doing in your salons, the idea salons, is every race, every ethnicity, every economic, people with depravity and people with lots of money can come into a salon, right? And it's through that diversity that you're going to actually find the best questions asked. And I think that's the state you're creating. Now, yes. Okay. You speak in your book about one of the rarest pleasures, which was taking a walk with Maurice Sendak, the gentleman and legendary author of Where the Wild Things Are. And actually, when I focused on that and I saw how he was so curt in the way he answered some of those questions, I realized I didn't have a disdain for him at all. I was just kind of like, wow, this guy is just really abrupt. It's like, that is the way it is. Don't question it. Why are you, questioning it? What did you learn about storytelling, and how can stories become catalysts for regenerative learning? He sounded like a real interesting dude.
Yeah, I mean, I think I, like many millions of Americans, grew up with him as kind of a nighttime ritual, right? With my parents. And it was a rare pleasure because he was an icon for me. I saw him at the end of his life. He has a kind of, it's not just the abruptness. I'm able to say and confirm from first person experience, there's a kind of very beautiful curmudgeonness that Maurice held in his life.
You said he was a curmudgeon.
Absolutely. But the most sincere and the most rare eyes to see the world. And I think, I use him in the book as an example to talk about the power of stories and how storytelling and the way that narrative has become such a critical way to organize our lives. We think about ourselves, our families, our careers, even the order of time, that there's a narrative arc. It really has kind of, in camouflage, seeped into every facet of our lives. And it helped me understand this notion of legacy narratives and new challenger narratives as a way to kind of see sociologically about how ideas change and they move through the world. And so I think when I use this word regenerative, I mean, we're talking a lot about regenerative agriculture right now in society, and regenerative ecosystems. And I think generative or regenerative storytelling, or in your question, learning, there's a way in which stories can revive and aliven our sensibilities and bring us alive, right? And I think he's a master at that. But what was fascinating is, as those of us who know that book well, he left space for us to complete the story ourselves. I think great stories are not a sideline passive sport. You are, as a reader, completing the narrative. You are a participant, an actor in the story, right? The actual quantity of words in Where the Wild Things Are is like less than 100 words. And between the poetic of the sentence and the beauty of his illustration and the mind of both the reader and the listener, we can complete that world. We can complete the story. And I think regenerative is really about the invitation to participate and co-author what comes next.
Well, you're activating imagination. You know, kids that would read that book, or the parents would read it to them, you activate that imagination. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about. And I remember, I'm going to make a comment here, just a comment. Not that long ago, I had Rebecca Costa on here, social biologist, who wrote Watchman's Rattle, and she wrote another book on The Verge. And I said, you know, if we have all this analytics and data these days that can tell us and predict the future and global warming and everything that's going on, and I said, why is it that as a species, we wait so long to take action, to do anything? And she paused for a minute and she said, because as a species, evolutionary, we really haven't evolved that much. That's the way we're born, you know, kind of, you know, the fight or flight kind of situation I'm talking about. And it's really interesting because
good example.
Because you're proposing something that's activating something to get people to go into a salon where they might wait until, like you said, a global warming is at a complete place to devastate the whole globe. And we're going, oh my God, now we've got to do something about it. You know, I always thought that interview for me brought out in me, it's like, holy Christ, we've been around as a species for thousands of years. Why in the hell haven't we been able to evolve this limbic system that's in here that just keeps firing back the same way? Now, you state that participation is a prerequisite for the democratic conversation. It's the key indicator for health of the public sphere. How can we compel government to evolve along with the values and needs of citizenry? And what new designs could be introduced to bring a culture of curiosity to government? Oh boy, this is a juicy question, because I don't know when government's ever going to change. And I think everybody out here keeps looking at it and saying, where are the leaders?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I think, you know, what's special about democracy, as you suggest, is it is a participatory process, not unlike this regenerative storytelling idea. And so it's interesting that, like, think about a presidential election and how we line up on stage the leaders who propose solutions. They propose, go to my website, you'll see I have a healthcare plan all laid out. It does this, it does that, does that. Now, I'm a solutionist like the best of them, but actually, I'd love to see the day where a leader proposes a process, not an answer. Wait, so you have all, on your website, you have the answer for education, transportation, climate. So we're eradicating curiosity. There's nothing new to figure out. And I, as a citizen, I'm just supposed to choose which solution is the right one.
Or no, I'm supposed to put my faith in you because you've given me the solution and now I can just go to sleep.
Right. Well, right. There goes
Right?
your
In
left
other words,
wings.
oh,
Right?
you're gonna do this, you're gonna do that, and the world's gonna be better for the rest of our lives. And so, okay, I can
I
just
mean, I would love to see a presidential candidate who stands up and says, you know what? I don't know the right answer to health care, but I don't think there's one. And I think what I would do as president is to create dozens and dozens of grand experiments and bring people together who have experience and expertise and passion for the future and begin a portfolio of many experiments to innovate and find what is right for our nation at this moment in history. And let's make an era. I mean, I think of the JFK New Frontier era. We didn't know the answer is this is how you get to the moon. We said we're going to go to this destination, and the project is the process of getting there.
yeah. No, what you're saying is what needs to happen. The question is, what needs to happen to have that happen? I think you need to get more politicians in your salons.
Yeah. Well, I think, yeah, I mean, look, I write a little bit about, and I was a big fan of Andrew Yang, just as a
Yeah.
really outlier example of a presidential candidate. I had a little bit of a personal relationship with him, and I was a big supporter of just shaking up and introducing unexpected ideas. And
Yeah.
look, I think to your point, it's not a fatality of, whoa, government is over. I do agree with the question, where have all the leaders gone? But I think what we probably need is leaders from unexpected places. What I loved about Andrew is he was an entrepreneur, not a lifetime government leader. And I think bringing people in from other sectors that have not been career government or political operatives or elected officials can really mix up and remix, almost like a hip hop remix album. Like, what would it look like if I'd love to see Jose Andres, the chef, become president of the United States. I mean, obviously, he's not from the United States, he's from Spain. But I mean, it'd be really fascinating to understand the social entrepreneur and the other kinds of qualities that we probably need now that are actually exhibited in other domains than government, but government would be well to embrace. Right?
Yeah, it would bring some interesting perspective to the table regarding these potential solutions or even testing solutions. Now, I loved your little part in the book. You state the greatest threat to curiosity, extension of dialogue. Exactly what you and I are doing. You speak about the pop song 2016's We Don't Talk Anymore. And I didn't go to YouTube to go look at the song, but I do get that it's had 2.5 billion views. You state that we're losing our ability to converse, to exchange ideas, to find common ground. If you would, speak with the listeners out there about some of the recent evidence of this inability to dialogue and the antidotes for this problem. Hey, you already mentioned Black Lives Matter. You've already mentioned, the debacle with the environment, the CO2 emissions and global warming. There's many of these problems, but the question is, what are the anecdotes?
Well, I think that the We Don't Talk Anymore module, chapter, if you will, it's really about the art of dialogue, less than these kind of big world conflicts or projects or events. But they are the sources of, well, how do we converse and cooperate to deal with them, to your point, right? I think it's kind of very basic and very human and very almost more accessible than, say, the scale of climate or race. It's just like, how do we sit at a table and be with one another? And I think it's interesting, right? There's a lot of evidence of that, to your question of the inability. I mean, even the idea that there's almost like entirely new lexicons about about gaslighting and about these kind of the chaos of fake news. I mean, there's like new devices,
Yeah.
Also literally addictive social devices. There's all kinds of interesting variables that seem to be undermining our ability to just be with one another and hear one another. And actually, it's interesting because you've mentioned the salon several times, but one of the unique and most important characteristics of a salon is that they are essentially unscripted. It's not a conference where you have a sage on stage, as I like to say.
Right.
It's literally almost set up like a 3-day dinner party. And it's fascinating because some people feel very uncomfortable in the absence of that structure that they're used to. When it's unscripted, we say, look, here's a question, and we'd like you to take a full day to explore it, and to not have the distractions or the interventions or the channels that we usually navigate, those that are kind of like mediating devices. It makes us a little more naked, a little more, intimate with one another. And it's fascinating to see what leaders thrive and what leaders flourish in that, and where people need to kind of find their footing. So we've been kind of doing this experiment about how to set the conditions for people to hear one another and just revive that art of conversation. And it's fascinating.
Well, I think that they're uncomfortable, number one, too, when they come into an environment like that, usually, because that's not what they've experienced. That hasn't been what the norms are. That hasn't been set.
Right.
Two, I remember doing this work at many places where we had just a talking stick, and we would pass the talking stick around and follow the Native American kind of philosophy about that. But we go into Levi Strauss, and we were handling handing the talking
Beautiful.
stick around, right?
I love that.
There's a guy in Minnesota that ran those salons, and he's still doing them. I'm going to introduce you to
him.
him.
Really? Okay,
yeah,
cool.
Yeah. But I agree with you, just to have that dialogue, to have that interaction, and not be distracted by a device or look up an answer on the device. Oh, I can Google that. I'm going to go see what Google has to say about that. I think is really, really important work that you're doing. And I want to tell my listeners, Seth's book's here. Go get it. Just go get it. Read it. It's great. It's a great book. Go to his website, Curiosity and Company. You're just type in Curiosity and Company, and it's going to come up. It's a wonderful website. You're going to learn more about him. You're going to learn more about the book. You can learn more about what he's doing and his salons. One last question.
Sounds good.
I found this book is one of the most thought-provoking books I've reviewed in quite some time. It provides guidelines and ways to shift our thinking and our worldviews if people take it and use it. What advice would you like to leave the listeners with that they can apply to their work and their personal life that would transform their levels of curiosity to become radically curious?
What a juicy way to conclude. I love the gift that we're giving each other. I think it's a term we spoke about indirectly, but maybe didn't even use the specific word. But I think that asking questions and really stepping into a radical curiosity is about reclaiming power. And it's almost like the more optimistic flip of your lemmings model and my endangered species concern, which is that don't give up. Don't sign off, folks, right? It's not the Matrix, right? We have an extraordinary amount of power to grab the reins of our lives and the work that we do and construct wildly beautiful meaning. And without questions, we resign that power. And so for me, the kind of call to action and the thing that I would do is I would remind ourselves that questioning is a form of power.
Oh, certainly. Not only that, a form of freedom, because it liberates you in having a feeling, not so much of knowing, even if it's of not knowing, but it's the fact that you took the time to question, right? And as you said, you're a solutionist. I heard that in one of the things. Well, okay, so you're going to take the pieces, put them together, any designer does, to come up with a solution. You're a designer. Artists do the same things.
Right.
I wrote a book on intuition. You're going to listen to intuition and you're going to either respond or ignore it. But the key is it's fundamentally going to excite your intuition. It's going to help you get in touch greater with that in a greater way, and in a way to listen to it, and then most importantly, take action on it, believe in it. Seth, it's been just an honor and pleasure to have you on the show. I could have stayed on and asked a lot more. I skipped 3 or 4 of the questions, but only because of timing.
Absolutely.
I totally appreciate what you're doing. I wish you all the best. Let's stay in touch.
I'd love that. No, thank you so much for your kindness. I love.
Namaste to you and to everybody there at Curiosity and Company to keep up the work. I'm going to have to come into a salon with you. I would love to do that.
We'd love to have you. A delight. Have
Thanks,
a great
Seth.
afternoon.